Good afternoon.
That question of the Electoral College and the role it might play still or not, how do you read that?
Yeah, I think I'd have to take a slightly different view than your previous guest just made. And this is a point that I just wrote about actually for our Mile End Institute blog this morning, where I think there is a way in which a candidate who loses the popular vote by 8 percentage points can still actually win the election through the Electoral College. And it has to do with basically racking up wasted votes. The Democrats, having lots of wasted votes in California, maybe even more so than Hillary Clinton last time. But Donald Trump winning more narrowly in those red states that he won very big last time, like Texas. So if he wins Texas very narrowly this time, that will depress his popular vote share. But in terms of the underlying Electoral College map, it remains unchanged. And so that's how you can get that really skewed disproportionality, perhaps even more so than 4 years ago.
So winning it is what counts, not the margin that you win it by.
Exactly. So the Electoral College is a winner-take-all system in each state. So you only need to win a state by one vote. Hillary Clinton won California by 4.3 million votes. Any vote above one, a margin of one in that state, was completely wasted. In fact, her entire national popular vote lead, which was just over 2 million, was due to her extraordinarily large margin of victory in California. If you took California out of the picture, she would have actually lost the popular vote. And so what I'm saying is that I think there's a possibility that Biden could do even better than Hillary Clinton in these blue states like California and New York, whereas Donald Trump might not do so well in some of these what were once rock-solid red states like Texas, but he could still win Texas, but just by a smaller amount. And that wouldn't hurt him in the Electoral College, but it would hurt him in the popular vote, and that's where we get that skew.
But let's talk a little about places like Texas and Arizona, which look to be moving towards the Democrats. If those votes went Democrat, if those states went Democrat, how much of a game changer would that be for the outcome?
Yeah, so basically, if Trump loses Texas, it's pretty much game over for him. He has to, if you look at the states that he won last time, he can afford to lose Michigan. He can afford to lose Wisconsin. He can afford to lose maybe one more state that's kind of a medium to small size state, like an Iowa. And he could still be elected. He'd still have enough votes, Electoral College votes, to win. But then if he's losing a Texas or a Florida or maybe in Arizona, and he's not making it up by making gains elsewhere, which is probably unlikely, then he's out of the picture. He's going to lose.
I was reading the other day, and I don't know enough about the state to know the truth of this or not. Perhaps you can help me. I was reading the other day that Texas, the particular writer was saying Texas, it's not that Texas has been a truly Republican state all these years. It's been a non-voting state, and the Republicans were the more active set of voters, and therefore the Republicans repeatedly won that state. But that a newly active Democrat base has mobilized its vote, and that's what's making the difference in Texas.
Yeah, so it's an interesting point. I mean, what has historically been the case is that if you look at voter turnout through the racial demographics, white and African American voters vote at broadly similar rates. Actually, when Obama ran for president, African Americans voted at a higher turnout rate than whites. But Latino voters tend to lag behind quite considerably. And there have been many efforts to try to mobilize the Latino electorate, and no one's really been able to close that gap. There are some who believe that maybe with all that's been going on with immigration, the politics of immigration, and questions about social values and so on, that this might be what mobilizes a key group in the electorate in a state like Texas, where the Latino population is a substantial proportion of the electorate. And this is what's so hard for pollsters, because it's really hard for them to predict what turnout's going to be, and that really affects their ability to poll accurately, because they have to weight according to what their expected turnout is. And that's just, at the end of the day, that's a call that the pollsters have to make, what they think is the most plausible turnout rates for these different groups.
And does it look as though the turnout is big based on the pre-voting, the pre-November the 3rd voting?
The early voting can be a little misleading sometimes because we see, I think maybe your listeners have seen these long queues outside early voting stations. Some of that's a product of the fact that early voting, there are fewer polling stations that open up for early voting, and they often are open for shorter hours. So naturally, you can get queues that would be a queue that you see outside of an early voting station is not the same as the kind of queue that you would see, wouldn't tell you the same thing as a queue that you'd see on election day outside a polling station. That's one thing that I'd say. The other thing is that a lot of the academic literature has suggested that early voting doesn't really raise turnout that much. It just means that people who are already going to vote have a bit more of a convenient range of choices. But what makes me think that this could be a high turnout election is that 2 years ago, the midterm elections, the Senate and House elections, had unprecedentedly high turnout, the highest turnout since women have got the right to vote. And that might be a sign of an American electorate which is excited, activated, fearful, but mobilized and politicized and ready to vote. And maybe that's what we could expect in this presidential election.